In the 1995 documentary project A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese Through American Movies, the legendary director shared his perspective on filmmaking and analyzed his favorite American films that shaped the historical development of cinema and influenced his own unique style. To make movies, one must possess humility. These are among the first words spoken in the documentary. Martin Scorsese emphasizes that every filmmaker faces a fundamental dilemma: how to balance personal interests with external commercial demands. A director must navigate the system skillfully, expressing their ideas within the boundaries of established rules and norms. After all, profitability comes only from what resonates with the audience. Both the director and the producer must find common ground to create something meaningful. The Bad and the Beautiful, 1952, is an excellent film that explores the relationship between a director and a producer within Hollywood's studio system. In the early years of Hollywood, producers were the key figures at film studios. There were only 5 major companies, and they controlled every aspect of filmmaking. They owned theaters, had long-term contracts with actors, and even dictated the style and appearance of their stars. Each studio had its own distinct identity and aesthetic. Producers like David O. Selznick directly influenced scripts, visual elements, and even fired directors who didn't meet their expectations. Those who knew how to compromise thrived within the studio system, while individualists were often forced out like Buster Keaton and Erich von Stroheim, or turned to low-budget films or cultivated their own unique styles, as Alfred Hitchcock, Frank Capra, and Cecil B. DeMille did. According to Martin Scorsese, directors in the history of American cinema embodied 4 distinct roles: the storyteller, the illusionist, the smuggler, and the iconoclast. From its inception, Hollywood distinguished itself by categorizing cinema into genres, thus establishing a streamlined production process. Film became a medium for crafted stories rather than a reflection of real life. The first storyteller of Hollywood who emotionally impacted audiences with his narratives was D.W. Griffith. His 1912 film The Musketeers of Pig Alley is considered a precursor to the gangster genre. Griffith's protege, Raoul Walsh, expanded on this legacy with films like High Sierra, 1941, and Colorado Territory, 1949. In both, he tells essentially the same story but frames it within different genre conventions, showcasing the versatility of cinematic storytelling. In the 3 foundational genres of American cinema: westerns, musicals, and gangster films, variations of similar characters appear repeatedly from one film to the next. With each new iteration, these genres were refined, enriched, and ultimately transcended their rigid boundaries. Among westerns, particular attention should be given to John Ford's classics such as Stagecoach, 1939, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, 1949, and The Searchers, 1956. Other notable films include The Furies, 1950, and The Naked Spur, 1953, by Anthony Mann, The Big Country, 1957, and The Left-Handed Gun, 1958. These films not only epitomized the genre but also expanded its artistic and narrative possibilities, setting benchmarks for storytelling and character development in American cinema. Gangster films hold a special significance for Martin Scorsese. He highlights masterpieces such as Regeneration, 1915, and The Roaring Twenties, 1939, by Raoul Walsh, The Public Enemy, 1931, by William Wellman, and Scarface, 1932, by Howard Hawks. Other notable works include I Walk Alone, 1947, by Byron Haskin, Force of Evil, 1948, by Abraham Polanski, and many others that shaped the genre. Vibrant musicals are another cornerstone of American cinema. Standout examples include Gold Diggers of 1935, by Busby Berkeley, 42nd Street and Footlight Parade, both 1933, by Lloyd Bacon, Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944, and The Bandwagon, 1953, by Vincente Minnelli, My Dream is Yours, 1949, by Michael Curtiz, and A Star is Born, 1954, by George Cukor. Cinema, at its core, relies on technological innovation. The rapid advancement of technology allowed Hollywood to outpace other countries in developing the art of filmmaking. Cinematography, editing, film stock development, larger screens, the introduction of color, sound, and special effects all transformed movies into a grand spectacle. The awe-inspiring sets of Intolerance, 1916, by D.W. Griffith, and The Ten Commandments, 1923, by Cecil B. DeMille exemplify this spectacle. Masterful uses of close-ups and master shots can be seen in Sunrise, 1927, by F.W. Murnau, and Seventh Heaven, 1927, by Frank Borzage, showcasing the magic of visual storytelling. When silent films transitioned to sound, cinema underwent a complete transformation, quickly learning to use dialogue, voices, noises, and sound effects as more than just a novelty. In films like The Big House, 1930, by George Hill and Ward Wing, Scarface, 1932, by Howard Hawks and Richard Rawson, and The Public Enemy, 1931, by William Wellman, sound conveyed crucial narrative elements that were not explicitly shown on screen. The introduction of color added vibrancy and enabled directors to evoke emotions and craft atmosphere through color palettes and costumes. This is exemplified in the Technicolor noir Leave Her to Heaven, 1945, by John M. Stahl, and the Western Johnny Guitar, 1954, by Nicholas Ray, where the interplay of hues enhanced the storytelling and mood. When cinemas expanded the size of their screens, directors mastered the art of immersing audiences into the worlds of their films, creating a sense of presence. This is evident in works like The Robe, 1953, by Henry Koster, East of Eden, 1955, by Elia Kazan, Some Came Running, 1958, by Vincente Minnelli, and Land of the Pharaohs, 1955, by Howard Hawks. Since 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968, by Stanley Kubrick, filmmaking has become closely intertwined with computer-generated special effects, pushing the boundaries of visual storytelling. While cinematic illusions rely on technology, the true magic of cinema lies in the director's vision. The essence of this magic is the ability of creators to conceptualize and bring to life immersive cinematic worlds. Technical and budgetary constraints, studio regulations, and government censorship have always driven directors to innovate. The more rules there are and the smaller the budget, the more inventive and stylistic the films tend to become. A great example of achieving a chilling atmosphere without any special effects is Jacques Tourneur's Cat People, 1942, and I Walked with a Zombie, 1943. These films demonstrate how resourcefulness and creativity can triumph over limitations, delivering impactful cinema. Film noir, which emerged in the 1940s, became a masterful way to create stylish and shadowy worlds using nothing more than the interplay of light and darkness. Iconic examples include Scarlet Street, 1945, by Fritz Lang, Detour, 1945, by Edgar G. Ulmer, Double Indemnity, 1944, by Billy Wilder, Crime Wave, 1954, by André de Toth, Outrage, 1950, by Ida Lupino, Gun Crazy, 1950, by Joseph H. Lewis, and Kiss Me Deadly, 1955, by Robert Aldrich. These films exemplify how minimal resources and innovative lighting techniques can craft intense, atmospheric stories filled with moral ambiguity and psychological depth. The McCarthy era, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War forced filmmakers to express criticism of social and political realities. However, they had to do so by disguising their messages and metaphors. Notable examples of such metaphorical films include Silver Load, 1954, by Alan Dwan, All That Heaven Allows, 1955, by Douglas Sirk, and Bigger Than Life, 1956, by Nicholas Ray. Films like The Incident on South Street, 1953, and Shock Corridor, 1963, by Samuel Fuller also used this approach to critique the times. While The Bad and the Beautiful, 1952, by Vincente Minnelli was a reflection on Hollywood's golden age, his film 2 Weeks in Another City, 1962, released a decade later, starkly illustrated that producers and directors were no longer confident. The golden age of cinema had passed, replaced by a sense of despair and a search for new forms and methods of cinematic expression. Not all filmmakers fought against censorship and expressed their political views through metaphors and stylization. Some directors were outright iconoclasts, directly challenging the established Hollywood system. These directors played a pivotal role in slowly, but steadily, changing the film industry and contributing to its gradual evolution, pushing boundaries and advocating for a more open and experimental cinema. In the 1910s and 1920s, cinema served as entertainment and an escape from reality. However, even during this time, realistic and somber stories began to emerge, such as Broken Blossoms, 1919, by D.W. Griffith, and The Wedding March, 1928, by Erich von Stroheim. In the 1930s, in response to the economic crisis, filmmakers began releasing films that depicted immoral wealthy characters and oppressed poor people, such as I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, 1932, by Mervyn Leroy, Wild Boys of the Road, 1933, by William Wellman, The Scarlet Empress, 1934, by Joseph von Sternberg, and Citizen Kane, 1941, by Orson Welles. Sex, violence, and realism became firmly integrated into cinema in the 1950s. In 1951, Elia Kazan directed the provocative A Streetcar Named Desire, and 3 years later, the intensely realistic On the Waterfront. Otto Preminger addressed the issue of drug addiction in The Man with the Golden Arm, 1955. These films represented a shift in the portrayal of complex social and personal issues, marking the beginning of a more honest and gritty era in American filmmaking. The drama Sweet Smell of Success, 1957, by Alexander McKendrick, and the comedy 1, 2, 3, 1961, by Billy Wilder both critique and mock the powerful and their codes of conduct. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, by Arthur Penn, marked the definitive opening of the door for the depiction of violence on screen. Meanwhile, Stanley Kubrick and John Cassavetes began a deep exploration of interpersonal relationships and themes of sexuality in cinema, with films like Lolita, 1962, Barry Lyndon, 1975, Faces, 1968, Husbands, 1970, and more. Thus, Hollywood cinema experienced the collapse of the Golden Age, overcame the Hays Code, endured political crises, and shifted from epic tales to more intimate stories of the human soul. The Golden Age of cinema, 1930s to 1950s, gave way to the fight for freedom of speech against political pressures and the competition with the growing influence of television. This era birthed the new Hollywood, of which Martin Scorsese became a prominent and influential figure.